Welcome. Now, if you're an Australian business owner thinking about your future exit, what I'm about to share could literally be worth millions to you. I'm Catherine Porritt, and with me today is my co-founder of the headquarters, Simon Yolton. Today, we're going to be revealing something most business brokers won't tell you. This is the 8 critical value drivers that elite buyers will actually pay premiums for. Our research with over 100 Australian business sales found that on average, a 40% gap between standard valuations and what strategic buyers will pay when a business is properly positioned. So without further ado, here we are talking you through those 8 value drivers. Hey everyone, today Simon and I are going to be tackling the 8 critical value drivers that elite buyers will always pay a premium for. So if you only have one video that you want to watch today, you only have time to do one video and you are looking to sell your business sometime in the next few years, make this your video. All right, so Simon, without further ado, let's begin by tackling probably the most important question of all, and that is, what do premium buyers really look for? Before we go into each of those 8 value drivers, why are premium buyers buying? What are they really looking for? And then let's go into each of those 8 critical drivers.
So, Catherine, I can tell you, first of all, what they're not necessarily looking at first and foremost anymore. It's still an important factor, but it's really not the deciding factor. And that's profit, historic profit. Okay, so what we've seen traditionally, and particularly in Australia until very, very recently, is we've seen businesses valued purely based on a multiple of profit, sometimes a multiple of revenue, and depending on the multiple range, depends on the type of business from various sectors and so on. So I always sort of say that's a really a rear view sort of approach to valuing a business, as you're looking at historics. You're not looking at where the business is actually going to go. Okay, so what we've now started to see is that there is a significant valuation gap between using that method of valuing a business and what a business ultimately can sell for if you really understand what's driving that value. So it's items that are not necessarily seen at first hand just by looking at the profit. You need to take that forward-looking approach. Unfortunately, what we've seen in Australia, well, certainly in most recent times, is a flood of money from investors that has typically not been here before. So private equity and people like that. And they are fortunately looking at where the business is going to go, not where it's been. So that's actually really helpful for people trying to get the most amount of money when they get to that point of exiting their business.
You know what? That is such great news, right? For us at the headquarters, with the businesses that we're dealing with, small and medium-sized Australian businesses that are looking to exit sometime in the future. The great news is that it's not all about profit. There's lots and lots and lots of cash in the market. There's lots of investors in the market. There's lots of people buying in the market. So that's the perfect segue, Simon. Thank you so much for giving me that to talk about these 8 value drivers. Now, I am going to start though with financial drivers because it is still going to be, of course, really important. So what are some of the things that those premium buyers are really looking for in the market right now, Simon, as Aussie businesses are examining whether to exit sometime in the next few years?
First, what they want to see is clean, easy to follow, familiar financials. Okay, so that is really, really important. So what we find with a lot of businesses is they have their own methods of financial reporting. There's not really a common thing that you see in every business. It does differ. And I say this all the time, and I'll say it again. What you never want is a prospective buyer trying to figure out what's happened in the business. Okay, so when they look at the financials, they'll look at the key trends. They will look at the profit, but they will also look at how the profit's been derived. You know, has it been steady? Has it been steady? Has it been static? Has there been blips? And they'll basically want to understand what's driven that financial performance. Okay, so you can't leave them figuring it out. You've got to really examine the financials, make sure they're clean, they're easy to follow, make sure that there is any clarification if there's something in there that isn't easily understood from first appearance. Because what we have seen, and particularly at the headquarters, we've seen a lot of, is depending on how those financials are presented, it can make a huge difference to the ultimate valuation of the business. To give you an idea, one client that we're currently working with in a manufacturing business, they were ultimately being valued on what we call an EBITDA multiple. So, it's a measure of profit essentially. And the valuation range shifted from where it were to a potential banding, depending on if we could evidence a few other things, of between 0.5 and 1.5 where they were actually sitting. So this particular business was making a profit of $1 million. So at the high end, it's an additional $1.5 million. And at the lower end, it's an additional $500,000. Now, if you're sitting there watching this video and you're thinking, well, my profit's only 3, 4, 500,000, the same kind of calculation, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that you can make. In addition, by essentially having the same business, but financials presented in a much, much cleaner and tidier way. And there's one joke, Catherine, I'll say to you, because it happened very recently. We were actually working with a client who's looking to be acquired. And the lady who was running the accounts department had been part of the due diligence process, preparing the financials for the prospective buyer. And the questions the buyer was asking, it was evident they didn't quite follow what the financial position of the business were. So we reframed the way the information was presented, the exact same information, very factually correct, represented it in a different way via an email. That's how they wanted to see this information come across. And the valuation went up $220,000. So we all write good emails, but I think that kind of tops it off as one of the best emails that person certainly wrote, probably in that year. 220,000 additional in proceeds. That's as a result of presenting information exactly how that particular buyer wants to see it.
I have so many stories that are similar to that. And I think this is the really interesting thing when we think about financials, Simon, the kind of businesses that we're working on to help at the headquarters. It's not just about what's on that spreadsheet or the balance sheet or, the profit and loss reporting. It's about the storytelling behind that. And so I think what's really exciting for prospective clients to hear is that when you get a really good story around those numbers, suddenly those that sale price can really escalate. Or if you're hiding things in there and you're not telling the story properly, the opposite can happen. Do you have any other stories like that might help people to understand it's not just about that balance sheet, it's also about the stories that you tell behind the numbers?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And we've got, again, first-hand experience when we're working with businesses where the one thing we really hone in straight away and focus on is commingled expenses and costs. So, personal expenses being caught up in business expenses. Now, it happens. We know that we've run businesses ourselves. We know how it works, okay? And there are often expenses in there that just shouldn't be in there, okay? And then we know the reasons why often they filter through. And you know what, that's fine. We're not trying to undo what's been done in the past. But what we do need to be really clear on is that we need to show a buyer, we know that moving forward, this is how the business would operate if this expense wasn't being in there. So an example might be a company vehicle that's being heavily used as a personal vehicle. It's not wholly and exclusively for the business. We just need to make that clear. Travel expenses, we see that often where there's travel that's taken place. All of a sudden it's a family holiday, but it's caught up within the business expenses. Again, it happens. That's fine as long as we are able to clearly pick that out and articulate the story around that. A big one that we see on a very often basis as well is we see that blips in the revenue aren't correctly explained. So we work with a lot of businesses where it's seasonal. So there's a lot of seasonal peaks and troughs. So again, why did the profit decrease that month? Why did the expenses go up that month? Cash flow issues. We've all seen them in businesses. We've probably all had them, particularly when you're in a growth phase or early stage phase even. And it's explaining what's happened, why has it happened. Again, don't leave a prospective buyer trying to figure out exactly what's gone on. Clear financial management, it drives your business value up. We say over 40%, but we've seen businesses nearly double their value by being able to prove exactly what's going on. And it creates also a discipline in the business. If someone's really clear on how they're running the business from a financial perspective, and how they're managing cash, how they're paying creditors, it really does show that, hang on, this is a team here that we're looking to to get involved with that are actually understanding how business should be run, and they're really disciplined. And that's going to run through for the other things within the business as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And look, I'm sure that a question that's on a lot of business owners' minds is, what if we did have a couple of bad years? Do we have to hang around for how long before we can start looking for an acquirer? Like, what is your advice to a business owner who perhaps has been on a bit of a roller coaster or had a couple of poor years? Can you tell a good story around that? Should you still be looking to sell, or should you be putting a bit more time to get some consistency there? What's your experience in that area?
Yeah, look, it differs considerably between sectors, but the profit isn't the be and end all. You actually find, well, we've actually worked with businesses that haven't effectively had a profit. Okay, they've not effectively had a profit. And the reality is, if they're still generating revenue, there's still a worth there. Because what we have to remember is some businesses that are acquiring, they're acquiring because they've already got scale, or they're trying to achieve scale. And by bolting on that business to their current structure, it changes the dynamics of the business. So you've really got to understand the kind of buyer, Catherine, that you're talking to answer that question, because each buyer is going to be very different in the way they approach a transaction. So we say as much due diligence and effort essentially needs to go into understanding who the buyer is as in your own business trying to prepare it. So in an ideal world, if you had 2 years, perfect. You would sit there, you would make everything perfect, you would clean everything up, you'd separate out your expenses, personal via business, you'd make sure you're being paid a salary that's a commercial rate salary, not heavily dependent on dividends, which I know some accountants that might be watching this might say, oh no, don't do that. But the reality is they're the kind of things that need to be, instilled in a business so the business runs as a real business would do. Now, where you haven't got time to do that, and we do work with clients where the time is of the essence, they haven't got 2 years, 3 years, whatever it may take to do that, then you can really speed that process up. But it is all then about telling the story, and it's about working it through. It's not just about saying, oh, this is how I've been doing this and that, or when you've been questioned. It's being ahead of that curve and actually making it really clear at the beginning. But this is what you've been doing. This is why you've been doing it. This is how it would be done if this business was to be acquired by yourself. And that is the best possible advice I can give anyone, Catherine, in answer to your question, which we hear all the time.
Yeah, 100%. And best people to help you put that story together is, of course, going to be Simon and I at the headquarters. We can help you with how to read those numbers and tell that story in a way that really helps you to find those growth opportunities, and the right buyer, I think, is often also, as Simon said, the most important thing. All right, so we're moving along from financial drivers, which is the thing that most people think is going to drive everything, but actually it's this second one that often can be the thing that is the most important driver in a premium exit value. So value driver number 2, Simon, team structure and talent development. So why is this often cited as the single biggest value destroyer, and what specific aspects of team structure do elite buyers evaluate when considering an acquisition?
So look, I can tell you why it's one of the single biggest destroyers is because what we have seen, and I'll use some conservative stats here, is 30 to 50% of value is destroyed if a business hasn't got their team structure correctly positioned. And that would predominantly be because you've got a business that's heavily owner dependent. Okay, and that's what we see so often. And there are often the cases where the business is a very small business and the owner may be the only operator in the business. That's fine. That's a different approach we would take to demonstrate that the business is still transferable, the relationships are still transferable as well. But we see businesses sometimes where there's quite a large number of people in the business, but the owner's still really holding on to the reins. And if there's ever been a better incentive to try to let those go, think about a 30 to 50% reduction, which we frequently see. And you can turn this around, okay? There's so many things you can do to actually turn it around. But you really do need to demonstrate to a buyer, I suppose the phrase I use often, which is one that you should really all take note of, is you need to demonstrate that you've built a business. You've not just created a job for yourself. So that is a crucial distinction. And I think if you keep that in mind, you're looking to sell a business, no one wants a job, they want to buy a business from you at this particular junction, then that is actually a really good starting position. But absolutely, Catherine, that for me is the part I probably enjoy most at the headquarters, is working with the owners to just free up those reins a bit, working with the teams to be able to really get them involved in running the business. So it's super attractive for the potential acquirer.
And what's so amazing about this is, in so many different instances where an owner is just looking at an acquisition an exit because they're just craving freedom, oftentimes with the right team structure, you get the option to not have to sell it all because you've set up a freedom and a lifestyle business. So I just love when we can tell those stories as well. Okay, so I think obviously this can be a value destroyer, but equally a lot of acquirers look at a team structure and the talent development in a company, and that can be one of the things that they really want to acquire. It's worth a lot of money to them to just bring a team in that's really, really excellent at what they do. So what are some of the things that small to medium-sized Australian businesses can do to develop that team and bring that structure in to really help elevate the valuation?
At the beginning, what you really do need to do is sit down, and I say this to even businesses I've helped at the start when they're setting up a business for the very first time, and we have a bit of a joke about it, and we say, right, sit down, let's draw your organisational chart. And it was, that's very corporate, it's only me, or it's me and my wife, or my husband, or whatever it may be. But you know what? It doesn't matter how many people are in the business, there's still them hats that are being shifted around, or indeed often all sitting piled up on the owner's head. So it's really important that you understand and can, again, visually articulate how it may be that this is the way that the business is structured. Okay, so it starts with understanding that. It starts with making sure that every single role that needs to be done in the business, and there will be multiple roles from CEO, CFO, sales manager, business development manager, team leader, compliance, whatever it may be, all of these roles. And that's why that org chart is really important, because you can actually start to visualize, okay, if I was a little bit more cash and I was able to fast forward a year or two, what would the business look like? You'd start to find other positions come onto this org chart. You then need to be able to, it doesn't have to be huge, but you need to be able to really clearly articulate the position description of each of those roles as well. Because again, remember, someone looking to buy your business, they're probably not looking to buy it and just leave it be. They're looking to actually grow that business or bolt it onto their existing business where they may have all of these other roles. So it just demonstrates to a potential acquirer that you've really thought about what's going on in the business. Everybody's got clear position descriptions, even if that happens to be you holding most of those roles. And for some reason, when I've been, I always say, nearly successful in this space, I've had business owners produce position descriptions for pretty much everybody but themselves. And I reckon it starts with producing it for yourself, because very quickly by doing that, you start to think, why am I doing that? Why am I don't know, I'll use one term, ordering the toners for the printers, or having to go to Officeworks to pick up the stationery orders, and whatever it may be. I mean, I've had businesses that are turning over several $1 million a year, but the business owner gets the call for the bin code to go and put the rubbish out at night. He'd gone home, but he gets the phone call because he's the only one who knows the bin code. As simple things as that. I mean, that's a small example, but you could just imagine what other things that business owner's keeping if the bin code's not shared widely. And I'm saying it a bit tongue in cheek, but you need to show evidence that the business, the structure of the business, how it's run, how it's thought about, who's doing what, and really be clear on how you're, ideally, if you've got a team, involving your other team and I call it creating a leadership team. You need to create a leadership team in your business if you've got the bodies in your business to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the interesting things that I've found over the last couple of months with a lot of the businesses that we're dealing with is that there's also in that org chart now starting to be AI workflows and AI positions. So AI agents that are sitting in some of those positions. And just as a quirk of, the right nows, I think it's really important to also have all of that documented and that as part of your org chart as well. So if you have moved in that direction, make sure that that's all a part of it, because that's really, really interesting to the acquirer to know what workflows you've got in place there. So, all right, we talk about knowledge transfer as well. So we've got this incredible leadership team. But one of the other things that I know you talk about really frequently with our clients is knowledge transfer and talent development. Can you talk to our watchers just to showcase a little bit more about why those two things are actually really important to someone looking to invest in or acquire a business?
Also depends on the DNA of the business at the time and what kind of business it's in. But we do work with businesses where we see, the business owner controlling 70% of the client relationships. And that in itself is a massive risk, because if the business owner's not around, and even if there's a post-transition period, it kind of is a real risk factor for a buyer, because at some point that business owner is going to leave. So they start to get suspicious about that at the beginning, and then they will ask more questions, and they want to know what steps have been taken to try to demonstrate that the relationships can be transferred. And this is where, if you've got team around you, it makes perfect sense to do that on your watch. Because if they're thinking, well, I'm going to have to take that responsibility on to get someone to sit with Peter to start transferring relationships to Pauline. And if that scenario is happening, that's just in their mind, more risk, it might not quite work, we've not seen evidence it's worked, more cost. And that really does become a problem for a buyer. It starts to, if they're working on abandon, and we move that again back to that financial topic at the beginning, and they may say, right, for businesses of this type, we're prepared to pay 3 times profit to 6 times profit. You start to sit still around that lower end, that 3 times. Once you can start to evidence all of these things, your multiple starts to increase, and that's when you start to get that premium pricing outcome. So you really do want to try to demonstrate that you've been successful in those relationships being transferred. You really want to go beyond just saying you've done these things. So just taking someone along to a meeting, it's a good start, but if you're still handling everything and they're not allowed to speak, that's a problem in it. So you need to start to create a forum where you're comfortable to actually pass some of this on. So what acquirers really like to see is that you've been very good at delegating. Now, when I say that word to business owners, they're sometimes like, oh no, it's better I do it myself. Otherwise, I end up having to do twice as much work. Yeah, you know what? Unfortunately, sometimes at the beginning, you absolutely do. One of the things I personally do is spend a lot of time with business clients, working with them to create that leadership management team. And I create the skills, the capabilities within the team so that the owner can slowly start to pass off responsibilities. And at the beginning, you'll find everybody's in this one meeting. But you can fast forward a few months and the owner doesn't even need to turn up to these meetings. They start to get feedback in the form of minutes from the meetings or actions. Whatever we do, we set up various different systems so the owner can still have that control by checking in. I call it the ultimate success point is when you've got that MI pack, that management information pack, when the owner's actually getting handed that and they can see exactly what's going on in their business just by reviewing all the data. But ultimately, it's the team that's feeding that in. So really, that's a really good way of involving your team, and it creates a safe way of doing it for the owner, where they don't panic that they've just given up so much control and it's all going to fall over.
Totally agree. And again, you have given me the most perfect segue to our value driver number 3, which is all about customer diversity and relationship strength, which has a lot to do with what Simon was just talking about with the team owning those, perhaps larger relationships. But there's more to this one than just relationships with the team. What we're talking about here is the diversity of the type of clients that you're serving, because what we absolutely know is that when an acquirer is looking at the value of a company, if it's just focused and concentrated on one type of client or even just a handful of clients, that can be alarm bells, right, Simon?
Yeah, absolutely. And some businesses, just by their nature, I'm working with a company at the moment that supplies a lot of equipment to big mining companies throughout Australia, and their clients are huge. You can count on one hand the number of clients. The problem with that is, it's often a big risk factor. So it's not to say it's not very lucrative from a financial perspective. So we don't discourage that, but you do need to really be aware of that client concentration risk. and start to manage it. And there's so many different ways that we help businesses to be able to manage that. So it's not a case of stop doing it, go and do something completely different. But there really are ways that you need to look at that to be able to reduce that dependency. And owner dependency again is where that creeps back in. If it's just one person managing that relationship, you're able to if you're able to bring other people in to be able to help assist with that, create various different touch points. You have to remember as well that the clients like that. There is always this this sort of ingrained thing that we find in the founders' minds, and I've been there as well. And I was very precious over my first big contract that we actually had. It was only me that could deal with it. Do you know, I realised very quickly how replaceable I could become. And when I started to bring other people in, and the feedback from the client was, it's great, because we could never always get hold of you. We knew you were busy. We didn't want to bother you. So having that greater touch point for clients like that. But again, we can as business owners feel it's a bit of a risk. So client concentration is important. I think you'll find though most businesses, because they've not necessarily looked at their business from the external perspective, which is really, Catherine, what we really do all the time. They don't really realise how dependent necessarily they've been on one particular client, and that actually starts to create a big issue for them. And we use like a 40% rule, which it's a rule essentially whereby if 40% of the revenue of that business is coming from one client or more, so it can be higher than 40% sometimes. It's a significant devaluer for the business. Okay, so and you can see your business drop by half in terms of value. So it's really crucial that you understand your client concentration list, and then what do you do about it? That's the next, obviously, thing that every business owner should be looking at.
Yeah, and this gets me really excited, actually, because this is one of the things that I feel like I can really add a lot of value to the clients that we're working with in the headquarters, is seeing where there is an opportunity for them to expand either their market penetration in a particular area, because they've just been so, one-eyed focused and, just working this business, and it's been their baby for years and years. And, you get Simon and I looking at it and we can go, hey, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? And then suddenly there's another potential market that you hadn't thought about. And there's also potentially other ways that we can grow market share in either existing markets or other markets. And again, just having Simon and I take a look at it and help you with this concentration issue, and just seeing what you can't see for yourself because you've been too in the weeds is really, really fun. I really love this part of what we do, and I know we can add a lot of value there. All right, amazing. So we've got the first three covered. Now, number 4 is the one that's probably going to make most of our creatives, most of our entrepreneurial types want to cry, but it is really, really important. So I'm here with you, all of you who want to cry and be really, really bored through this process, but I want you to listen really, really closely to what Simon has to say, because the number 4 value driver is really important. And it's one of the things that's going to get you tripped up if you don't have this ready for an acquisition. So value driver number 4, if you haven't picked this up already from what I was talking about, is operational systems and processes. So I'm going to let you, Simon, talk about what we need to do to be prepared, and so that we can add value to that acquisition and be really, really attractive to a strategic buyer.
So this is the part where all business owners start to roll their eyes. Very few don't. It's the part that you think, oh, this is going to be really painful, and it's going to be a lot of work. And look, there's different ways of tackling this. I'm very confident when I say that 80% of everything you do is driven by 20% of your processes. Okay, so it really isn't quite as daunting as it may seem. So once you've really nailed down those immediate processes and those standard operating procedures, you would have heard that probably banded around before. SOPs, I think, is the acronym for that. Once you've nailed that down, you will find you really have a good grip on the majority of what's going on in your business. Okay, so remember that 80% of what you do generally driven by 20% of your processes. And then it's that final part, that's the bit that can take a lot longer. And we've worked with businesses that's gone through ISO standards. That's where they're really pushing for that excellence, that additional piece. So we're not talking about that at this stage here. So you can not need to roll your eyes. You can really relax a bit, and it's not as difficult as you think. But you've got to know what to process and what to do. Now, if there's ever been a better incentive to do so, I can tell you that businesses that have got operational processes documented generally would sell for between 20 to 30% more. Okay, so again, when you start doing your numbers and you think about all of this, it actually really makes sense for you to invest time to do it. Now, whether you do it yourself, which is often not the best idea, because one, you don't enjoy doing it, two, you're probably not very good at it, and three, you've probably got other things you should be doing to keep the business either as business as usual or growing, because you're coming to a point where you're trying to attract maximum premium for your business. You really don't want the business to fall off the edge of a cliff, and you say, but all my processes are documented, because that's actually counterproductive. So Catherine, it's never really been more important to think about that. And the word I use all the time, 3 words: plug and play. Okay, so anyone looking to purchase the business wants to plug and play. We all get frustrated when things are a little bit more complicated than plug and play. It's no different to businesses. They really do need to see clearly that they can pick up your business and either run it themselves or buy it from you and get you to run it without any hiccups, or put it into a bigger model. Okay, and you need to demonstrate that. And the way of demonstrating that is making sure your processes are clearly articulated and everybody knows exactly how that business is run, or the bulk of that business is run. So that's why it's such an important value driver that we constantly focus on at the headquarters.
It really is. Honestly, I joke about it, but it really is so important. Look, another reason that I think that owners doing it themselves is not a good idea is that we do things so intuitively as the business owner, particularly if you've been involved in the business since its inception, you've grown it. There's just so many things that you're doing without really thinking about it. When you're putting it into an SOP or a process document, oftentimes you can just skip through it without really thinking that through, which kind of brings me to the question of then what's the most effective approach to documenting those processes, Simon, in, across all the different diverse businesses that we've worked with over the years?
I'll talk from personal experience. I've been in a business before where it just grew rapidly, and we were running on a shoestring, didn't have a huge team behind us, and then we get to a point where we become very attractive, and we're sort of scrambling around trying to build out these processes to demonstrate that everybody knew what was going on in the business, and someone looking to buy us would be able to run it without any major issues. Fortunately, it was just around the time when smartphones were starting to come into starting to show my age a little bit here. We used a lot of video recording to be able to document our processes, because none of us had the time. We were constantly, charging up and down freeways and doing things, lots of travel. So we never really had the time to be able to, sit in front of a machine and start typing out all these processes. No one really enjoyed doing that. So just to get the processes documented, we used a lot of video technology to do that. And I say video technology, in them days, it was purely an iPhone recording a video. Now there's specific technology that we use to actually do this. It will then, and you've used AI as an example, Catherine, it will actually then build these processes as well for you, or assist you in the process building. But you've got to really know what you're building. And this is the part that we find all this technology is great, but you need to actually understand which processes you should focus on, which parts of those processes are going to add the most value. Otherwise, you'll find yourself, you could sit in front of your machine for weeks and weeks and weeks and just produce a load of stuff that, if it's not checked and tested as well, it doesn't really reflect what's going on in the business. So any process as well that you do put in place, and I gave an example of how I did it through the video technology. That's, I see a lot of businesses that are able to do it because they've got staff, or team members, as I prefer to call them. They get them to do it. So they actually have rules in the business, like no new process can be implemented in our business unless it's documented first. And then it gets signed off by a particular team that's responsible for reviewing processes. And some people think, this sounds like a lot of meetings, a bit of bureaucracy. It's not. I can tell you that poorly documented or incorrect or out-of-date processes are worse than having none, because you're guided the wrong way. So it's really, really crucial. And you can kill two birds with one stone by doing this, because not only are you improving your operational capability, but this is where you can start to show you delegate and you create that leadership team, and you give other people authority within the business and autonomy to be able to do more than just what their day job currently gives them bandwidth to do. They're able to actually get involved in creating processes for the business, and a lot of these people actually enjoy that. It also, remember, creates a buy-in for them. So when you go through this process post the deal, it can be quite difficult for people, particularly if staff are staying around in the deal. Whereas when you've given them some process, it's a bit like a map. They know where they're going. They know what to do. They know there's not going to be drastic change, because they're actually very clear on what they do. Otherwise, people can just get stuck into their groove, just start doing things, and then no one really knows, how they've done what they've done. So it really is, Catherine, like super, super important to take the time to actually do it. So plug and play, that's what you need to constantly have in your mind. That's what someone's looking for, something that's plug and play.
I love it. Plug and play. So I'm going to take a moment right now to give the headquarters a really big plug as well, because we're about halfway through these value drivers, and we want Australian businesses to take advantage of all of the money, the investment that's out there right now. There are fantastic investors and acquirers looking for these fantastic established Australian businesses to invest in and acquire. And our mission at the headquarters is to help you get the very best outcome that is possible by preparing you for that, helping you to grow to exit, and helping you to really get the best valuation possible. So if that's of interest to you and you like the idea of chatting with Simon and I about the value in your business and how we can help you to grow that so that you are prepared to get that maximum value, then all you need to do is head over to theheadquarters.com.au, and you'll see there is a calendar there. All you need to do is just go down to that calendar, review the information, read a little bit more about Simon and I and what we do here at the headquarters, and you can book in a complimentary call with us to talk about your business. All right, fantastic. So we are now on value driver number 5, which is supply chain resilience. So we're all about maximizing our value here and also mitigating risk. We turn our heads back, our minds back a couple of years to COVID, and this one became a really big value driver and also a really big risk factor for a lot of businesses that perhaps hadn't even really thought about this beforehand. So wondering, Simon, if you can talk about specific supply chain factors that sophisticated buyers are really looking for, and how our Aussie businesses can demonstrate resilience in this area.
And you're right to use COVID, because it's the one area that supply chains were hugely impacted in. And I don't think there's anybody that wouldn't have recognised some disruption of some form from COVID. There has been, though, even very recently, what I've seen a lot of disruption in is tariffs, as an example, which we've all seen a lot about recently. And that has actually, again, almost for me, made businesses think, I didn't quite learn from the mistakes of COVID, because we kept hearing all the time that COVID was this one major event, and it's probably unlikely that we would ever go through such a thing again. And then we start having global tariff wars, and that actually has been a very similar thing, Catherine, that we've seen with businesses recently. And the businesses that haven't had the plan B have really struggled a little bit. And when we talk about plan B and when we talk about resilience in supply chain, one of the things that's really important, and again, it's important because if you haven't got a resilient supply chain, what you would generally find is a 15 to 25% devaluation is pretty much instant. That's pretty much what a buyer would put on there straight away, because it's a risk if that supply chain is disrupted. They will also then be looking at things like the concentration of your supply chain, so how dependent you are on a particular supplier. So it's a very broad number I've just given you there. But in all cases, if you haven't got that resilience, it will become a big issue for a potential buyer. So it's important to understand that. It's important that you just with the examples we've used here of COVID, tariffs, and there's numerous other world events that will impact supply chains. But it's important that you look beyond the company you're dealing with and you actually look as to who they may be dealing with. And so when I use the example of, so COVID as an example, it impacted pretty much every business, in one form or another for a period of time because there were lockdowns. Tariffs, less so, but there are many businesses that deal with businesses that are impacted by tariffs. And this is what I'm talking about here. It's about being in a position to really understand that. Where you spot the risks, you articulate the risks. So again, you don't go in trying to hide this information from a prospective buyer, because they will often, particularly if you're dealing with private equity and so, they'll have very smart people on the investment committee that probably sit and chair on other boards elsewhere, and they will literally come with that killer question and say, well, what happens if that supplier is not able to supply aluminium because of this, and so forth. So you need to really understand that, and you need to always have that plan B. Now, that what we're not saying here is move away from having one dominant supplier, because you could have super terms with them. The customer service could be fantastic. Many reasons to stay with them. But you do always need to have that what if scenario, and so you can switch quickly. So one of the manufacturing businesses we work with at the moment, they were impacted by this latest round of tariffs that we saw through a third party that they was getting supplies from. But they had a plan B, slightly more expensive, but they had a plan B. So they switched over with practically no interruption. So for a business like that that's just going to command a higher value, because it's just fall through that risk factor that, if you don't do this, what you're essentially saying is, I know the risks are there, but it's going to be someone else's problem. And they're going to just price down the value of your business as a result, because it's a job that they're having to deal with, right?
Yeah, 100%. When we're talking about supply chains, we're not only talking about product-based businesses or manufacturing businesses, etc. There's also supply chain in terms of like technology. So for a lot of our businesses that might be more in the services industry, you've also got platform dependency that you need to factor in, and risk management around that. So exactly what Simon was just saying, that's transferable across all sorts of different industries, and making sure that you've got that plan B. If you're platform dependent on a particular CRM, what are you going to do if that CRM goes down for a week? Making sure that you've got, or is no longer in business, as the case may be. So having all of that set out is going to be really, really important to the acquisition. All right, so we've talked about supply chain and diversity and resilience and all of those nice things. The next one, which is value driver 6, really talks about your unique competitive advantages, which gets me really excited. This one is our intellectual property and proprietary assets. So, Simon, many businesses often don't even realize that they've got hidden IP value that they've developed in their business. So let's talk about what is IP, because it might be a concept that feels a little bit out there, not something that we talk about every day in a business. What does it mean, and what are buyers really looking for when it comes to IP?
Yeah, so look, people naturally think that IP is something we hear you hear that more in pharmaceutical businesses, or businesses where they've created something really special that they don't want anybody else to copyright. That sort of IP, the IP that is really quite clear what they've created, and they're trying to protect that essentially. What we really focus on, because that's quite obvious, most businesses that have done that would have spent time to actually, you'd hope, protect it. We do find in some cases though that there's still gaps, and that's why this is something that we know is so important, but we actually use professionals that we bring in from our existing network to actually assist with this, because it's so complex. The rules, the laws, everything changes depending if you operate in a country or you're external to the country's borders. So it's really quite a complex area. But what we always find, and even last week I was having a really, really good call with a business, and we identified 4 or 5 areas that should be considered for protection, but they weren't. So things like trade secrets, the way a business does certain things, the way a business does something a bit different to its competitors. This is all IP, and it's often hidden. the way that they may record data on clients, and the way that they may, record the way clients purchase, for example, and when they purchase, what prompts them to purchase. That all starts to form IP, and it becomes really, really valuable, and it can become, the biggest value driver in a lot of businesses. We often see 25 to 40% of business value is driven by this IP, and probably, 90% of it is what we'd class as hidden normally. It's not typical IP that people would think about. So you find businesses are often alarmed after we spend some time with them, and they sort of think, well, I just never categorized that as IP. I literally had overlooked that. I'd thought that, I had to, we were talking about copyrights, and, I had a recipe for a particular, a drinks bottle or a drink or something like that. It's way beyond that. Trade secrets in a lot of the businesses we work with is really where we find the real valuable IP actually is.
Absolutely. And there's also some really, it's not actually as complicated as you might think, I think is another message that I want to get to everyone. If we're talking about, actually getting a trademark, some of those things, if you've been avoiding that because it just feels like, oh my God, I got a legal team and I got to understand this there and I got to apply for it. It's actually with the right team around you who can help you manage that and identify what should be trademarked or what the IP is, etc., and how to categorize it and then what to do with it. It's really not as complex as it sounds. And in fact, you may be sitting on some really massive value that not only could escalate the value of your company, in many circumstances, we've actually seen that turn into an additional company, right? There's so much opportunity here. I'm wondering, Simon, if you've got any stories around that you might like to share in this space.
So you've really got to understand what your competitors are doing and how you're positioned differently. And then you've got to ask the question, the why. And when you start to look at that and you start to see, so for example, a big one we see is businesses that don't just have a CRM, a client relationship management system, but they physically use one. They've tailored it to be able to suit their business and to be able to maximize their opportunities. We find that as a massive value add in comparison to competitors of theirs. So when they really take the time to go beyond just what is the off-the-shelf system, and they start to, embed in their strategies touch points that this is the time we can tell from the data that people tend to buy more of this particular item. So we make sure then our supply chain is set to be able to deliver that. And then we work towards being able to increase that lifetime value of the client through using this software, for being able to make sure that we don't miss this opportunity. So that kind of example of using a CRM system, a technology-based system, is probably in a lot of businesses one of the biggest wins. We come by businesses that have been very, very successful, but they've either not had a CRM system, and I generally mean they've not had a CRM system, but they've still functioned, to businesses that's got some form of CRM system, but they really have done no customization at all. And it's just really not giving them that advantage that they could get quite quickly. So those that do, they don't recognize that's IP. They don't recognize that effort that they've put in is different from what everybody else is doing. And there lies your value. But not if it just, if you're presenting your business for some form of exit and you're not talking about it, because again, you're leaving the potential buyer to try and figure that out. And they're not going to say to you, oh, we see a lot of value in there you never told us, so we're going to pay you a lot more for it. So this is why you need to understand what you're sitting on. And that's how you command the higher value within your business.
Absolutely. All right. So IP, don't be scared. It's not as scary as it sounds. And it can drive a huge amount of value into the business that you might be sitting on right now and not even know about it. All right. So that brings me to our value driver number 7, which is market positioning and competitive advantage. This is probably the area that I get most excited about, because I have spent most of my career looking at market positioning and competitive advantage and setting companies up for success in this area. So the fact that this is one of the big value drivers is really, really makes me very excited. So Simon, why is this important, where a company actually sits and how much market share it has and the competitive advantage and market positioning? Why does all of that matter to a strategic buyer, and why would they pay more if a company can tell a great story in this area?
It's really important to understand the opportunities within your existing market. So I think that when you, so as an example, a business that's operating a bit of a niche is going to generally command a much higher value than one that is just, broadly mass market, unless you're doing something a little bit different, in which case, again, that's why you need to understand whether that links back to IP. So when we've spoken today about all of these different drivers, you can see they all interlink. So there's not really one dominant one over the others. It's very much a case of understanding how they all feed each other. But strong market positions, and you'll know this, Catherine, in fact, you probably from some of your research probably helped me calculate this. 20 to 30% is on a high valuation is quite often what you see by a business that can prove that they are dominating a market in one form or another. Now, that doesn't necessarily, we've got to think about markets, how they're positioned from a geographical perspective as well. So we have people in various states in Australia that are just a dominant player in that particular state, and they've got to really be able to prove that that's the case. So they need to actually have some analytics and some data from different bodies that actually evidence that. So it's very factual driven. That's the difference between market position and everything else we've spoken about, which is a lot more opinion based. This is very factual. So we need to really build a case to explain why the market for you is so attractive, why it's attractive with an investor coming in, particularly an investor that's prepared to fund, maybe get into adjacent markets that you haven't managed to get into because you haven't had the cash flow, or you haven't been, you haven't had the time, or you're just at the end of your career and you're not looking to take it forward. So that's when we start to articulate that opportunity to move forward and just be really clear on essentially, what you're selling to who, and why are you in a better position than a lot of your competitors. If you are in a weaker position, and this is where understanding your market is quite important, and we do work with businesses that are in a weaker position than a lot of competitors, and their desire is to be stronger. And that, Catherine, absolutely is where your strength is and where you've helped lots of our clients get to that point. There's nothing wrong with that if you are the weaker in business in that market, as long as you know what needs to be done to get you to that point. And I think that's where the work you do, Catherine, and you've done a lot of stuff that I've observed through working with clients with you that I haven't even thought about. And I think that this is understanding the opportunity, articulating it, how to get there. That's the part that really, all businesses need to have a really good look at, because these opportunities are often right under the nose, but they're just not seen often if you're tied up in your day-to-day running of the business.
Yeah, exactly. And when we look at, strategic acquirers, they're often looking just to plug and play, to use Simon's wording before, to just grab some market share in a particular area. So as Simon said before, this might be that you have a particular location that, you really dominate, and they want to move into that location, and they don't want to start from scratch and compete. They just want to eat up, what's the company that's already made it in that location. Other things might be a market position. So you might have a volume player that just wants to add a premium mix of products to what they're already selling at as a volume play, and you own that premium end of the market, and they just go, you know what, I'm prepared to pay an extraordinary value for this, because again, I can open up the market share and gain such a competitive advantage by acquiring rather than starting fresh in an additional area. So there's so many different ways of looking at this. Again, just really great to have some people take a look at this for you and see what you can't see for yourself, and where you really sit in the market and what's possible for you. So this gets really fun, I think, for Simon and I to play with, and we can open your eyes to all sorts of significant maximisation opportunities. All right, so we are now on to number 8. Number 8, so we've gone through 7 value drivers, all of which hopefully were a little surprising to you. In terms of, it's not just about profit. So this final one gets Simon and I really, really excited, because for a lot of you who maybe have been on a bit of a roller coaster, or you're looking for, you can see a bigger vision of the future and you want to be able to sell based on your growth potential and scalability, telling that big expanded vision of what it is that you've got in your mind, this is where the number 8 value driver comes in. And there are, in fact, acquirers out there and investors that are actually looking at future-paced value as well as what you've done in the past. So, Simon, let's start there. How does future growth potential become something that a strategic acquirer is really focused on?
So, Catherine, look, I can't remember the last time I met someone who didn't have an idea about how they could grow their business. I think it's just the privilege we have of talking to predominantly entrepreneurs or, business owners. There's always an idea. There's always something that could be done. So I love that when I learn that and I learn a bit more about it. But in most cases, a lot of these things have just not been done because you're caught up in the day-to-day running of the business, or money is a constraint to invest elsewhere, or as it happens with all entrepreneurs, and I can say this from experience, a new idea comes and that last idea is put to the side. It's quite remarkable, really, and growth is something we're naturally very good at, or we wouldn't have been in business for as long as we have been. Most business owners, a lot of them have created jobs. They've gone from strength to strength. They've grown from when they started to where they are now. So it's naturally in our nature to be able to grow business. But what we tend not to be so good at is really demonstrating the growth opportunity. So we have an idea, but that's kind of as far as it often gets. The difference is when you're preparing your business for some form of exit or creating options for yourself, is you need to be able to really demonstrate that the idea you've got has really got legs. Okay, so you think of it as if you were setting up a business for the first time. You would really be encouraged, and again, a lot of people will often say, but I never had a business plan when I started my business. I've been there, we understand that too. But if you really want to command premium value for your business, you do need to think of your ideas and your growth strategies as if you were starting a business from scratch. And you need to put some meat on the bone, where you need to really create a plan to demonstrate that it's not just an idea. This is a really good strategic option. And I call it upside. The more upside you can leave on the table for a potential buyer, acquirer, the greater value you'll get from your business. So really work that idea through. What's required? What's the financial projections look like? What's the return on investment based on the analysis I've done? Absolutely perfect. You're not leaving anyone to figure it out. It's really clear. And the most important thing, if you've got the time to do it, is to really try and even test it ever so slightly yourself without going all in. Because if you're coming to the end of your journey, let's call it that, you probably don't want to embark on another 3-year plan to capture another market share in an adjacent business line idea that you've got. But you can often, with existing clients, potentially achieve proof of concept, as I call it. And that's when people really pay for it, because you're not just saying, this is the idea, this is how it looks, this is how it's modeled, but I've actually proved it can be done, but I'm going to hand this one over to you. And that's how you create that additional value. So I get super excited about growth opportunities. I have to almost, Catherine, restrain myself a little bit because I've still got that sort of fire in the belly to be able to want to do it and grow those businesses. So I get, very, very, very excited indeed.
And I think that's one of the great things about working with people like Simon and I, where you can bring those ideas and we can help you do the research, help you test it in the market, get the proof of concept, as Simon was saying, but also put the meat on the bones for you and help you tell the story. So, because that's really what I think a lot of business owners in an exit situation aren't thinking like they're selling to an investor, but ultimately that's who's coming in. They're an investor. So almost like a pitch deck that you would do if you were pitching to private equity or if you were pitching to a VC. We want to tell that story of the future and really sell that to them, because that's where all of the future potential is. They love what you've done in the past and they're going to be super grateful for all the processes and everything that you've set up. but ultimately they're going to pay big premiums, maximum value for what it is that you've set them up to achieve in the future. So, Simon, this has been incredibly fun. Now, Aussie businesses, we have 8 value drivers that you can pull, these levers that you can pull to really get that maximum value out of your business. And here at the headquarters, how we operate is we work hand in hand with great Aussie businesses to help them to identify where those opportunities are across those 8 levers, and then help set them up for success if they're looking to be acquired, to be sold, to become, to bring an investor in sometime over the next 12 months to 5 years. So you want to just give yourself the time to get this all set up really well, work with us to really articulate that in a beautiful way, and then work with us to help identify those buyers and put it into the hands of the right people to get that maximum value. So all you need to do, if you are interested in working with Simon and I, or hearing a little bit more about what we do, is head over to theheadquarters.com.au. Simon, this has been a pleasure as always. I really appreciate your time today. 8 value drivers. Been super fun.